stories to be told, treasures to be found, silver and gold, dollars and pounds, never worth more than the stories of a town.
Now the song says we really should be on the road to Gundagai, but in fact it's this river, the Murrumbidgee, that has had far more impact on the shaping of this iconic town. The Murrumbidgee totally bemused the early explorers because it starts on the eastern side of Kosciuszko, flows east for a while heading towards the Pacific Ocean, but then does a big U-turn round past Cooma and Canberra before eventually heading west as it flows through Gundagai on its way to the Murray-Darling system. Explorers Hume and Hovell first passed through here in 1824. Settlers followed, but it was another explorer, Charles Sturt, who identified this spot as the best crossing point of the river for coaches, drovers and anyone else travelling between Sydney and Melbourne. If the river was up though, you had a long wait. Gradually the town began to take shape as traffic increased on the main north-south road. A town plan was laid out, structures became more permanent. Schools, shops, pubs, houses, all round here, despite the warnings of the local Aborigines. Torrential rain had been falling on the snowy mountains for weeks, but a sudden deluge up there created a giant swell in the river. People down here on the river flat weren't overly concerned. They had no way of predicting that a rolling wall of water was headed their way. The flood hit without warning in the middle of the night. Houses collapsed and were washed away. Some of the more solid structures withstood the onslaught, like Gundagai's first building, the Rose Inn that was right on this side here. People clambered onto the rooftops and into the trees and spent a night of horror as they listened to screams of people who were swept away. The real heroes of that tragic night were a group of Aboriginal men led by a fellow called Yarry. Using their flimsy bark canoes, they saved as many people as they could. They used the current to paddle out to grab people from the trees and roofs and get them back to shore. It's reported they saved 49 people that night. Either way, without their efforts, many more would have died. It was Australia's worst flood disaster. Gundagai moved to higher ground, and 20 years later, with the discovery of gold nearby, it was again a thriving township. Gold was extracted from the hills all around Gundagai, and that attracted bushrangers like bees to the honeypot. Notorious names like Dunn, Gilbert, Ben Hall, and Captain Moonlight. A tragic tale surrounds that of Andrew George Scott, better known as Captain Moonlight. He was a lay preacher that fell on hard times. His somewhat checkered bushranging career came to a head in a prolonged siege that happened on a property just out of town here called Wannabadgery. As the siege drew on, a gunfight erupted and Constable Webb Bowen was shot and killed. He was finally captured, although he never admitted to killing the constable, nor would he say who actually did it. His arraignment took place here at the Gundagai courthouse before a huge crowd. He was transferred to Sydney, where the main trial happened. He was finally hung at Darlinghurst Jail and buried at Rookwood Cemetery in an unmarked grave. This is Christine Ferguson, and she was to play a key part in Captain Moonlight's eventual return to Gundagai.
We had seen the letter that he wrote a couple of hours before his death, asking to be buried in Gundagai next to his two friends, Nesbitt and Wernicke, and Sam and I thought that this was something we could grant for him, even though it was 115 years later. We had to go through a lot of government bureaucracy. It had to be secret. There was a bit of scepticism about what was going to happen, but when the day arrived, we had in excess of 400 people, some people dressed up for the occasion, and they followed the procession out to the cemetery, and we were able to give Captain Moonlight a very good second burial.
So what was Gundagai like in those turbulent bushranger days? Well, one of the most remarkable discoveries happened just inside here. The town medico, a fellow by the name of Dr. Gabriel, had his residence just below this supermarket here. He died in Gundagai in 1927, and his place down here was locked and boarded up for decades. In 1957, they decided to turn this whole building into a supermarket. And that's when they opened the door on Dr. Gabriel's residence for the first time in 30 years. And what they found in here was like a time capsule. Everything was as he left it. Furniture, medical books, memorabilia, and stacks of these little boxes. And inside each one dozens of the most exquisite glass negatives. Dr. Charles Louis Gabriel lived in Gundagai from 1887 to 1927. Some 450 shots that he took capture Gundagai at the turn of the century and give us a unique window into the daily life of this town. You'll notice a shadowy figure in the foreground of some of these shots. That's the photographer's signature. He liked to include himself, and I know how he feels. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
That's great. Ah, the dog on the Tuckerbox. Never has such a humble piece of doggerel given a town so much great publicity. Nobody's quite sure when the dog on the Tuckerbox first came into Australian folklore, but it first appeared in print in the Gundagai Times in the 1880s. But the story that I'm really interested in surrounds the sculptor, Mr. Frank Rosconi, who fashioned the shape of the dog and built this monument here. He also carved something far more spectacular. It took Rosconi 28 years to complete this masterpiece. Nearly 21,000 individual pieces of marble make up this extraordinary statue. All the marble was sourced from quarries in New South Wales. He wanted to demonstrate to his peers back in Italy the quality and variety of stone to be found in Australia. What I find really amazing is that no plans, drawings or construction charts have ever been found. It appears he did this entirely by sight alone. He passed away in 1964 at the age of 90, leaving us with a legacy of these extraordinary marble sculptures. He also built many monuments like this cenotaph here in Gundagai, all over the countryside. But his skills were recognised all over the world. If you think this is grand, he also built the magnificent marble staircase at Westminster Abbey in London. So the road to Gundagai is a little less busy nowadays. The Hume Highway actually bypasses the town altogether. But the town still has a charm of its own. The river, bushrangers, gold, Italian sculptors, even the remnants of a railway echo the grand old days of Gundagai. G'day, mate. What's the chance of a lift? Oh, fantastic.